Okay, so welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to review the procedures that are outlined in the textbook for reversing scores, combining scores, specifically creating a sum score and then a mean score, as well as creating z-scores. So this tutorial is pretty much just going to be on the steps that you need to take to do each one of these procedures, and I'm not going to go really in depth with any kind of interpretation around the statistics. I recorded a second video which goes into detailed explanation about each of the steps and how to interpret each of these things. So definitely watch that if you're looking for more interpretation. This tutorial is just going to be on how to kind of execute these procedures using SPSS. So here's the data from the textbook, and the first thing that you need to do is come up with a recoded variable, which is to recode this ZL4 variable. There actually are two ways of doing this, and I'll show you the one that the textbook suggests, and then I've got another one that I think is good as well. So to do a recode of ZL4, one way to do that is to go into transform and then to compute variable. For our target variable, we're going to name this something similar, which is ZL4, but then we're just going to stick an R on the end of it to show that that's a recoded variable. For our numeric expression, we're just going to subtract each participants, or in this case lions, we're going to subtract each of their scores from 8. And doing so, as explained in the textbook, will reverse score each of the lion scores on this variable. A couple of additional things that you can do at this stage. You can actually put in a label for your variable. So we can call this, actually kind of forget what the textbook called it, but we can just call this the reverse of ZL4, like if ZL underscore 4R wasn't descriptive enough, and then you can say that this is 8 minus ZL4. So that's just one thing to do. Just give yourself a descriptive label there so you can figure out what the variable means. Okay, then I'm going to paste that. Open up that window, got my syntax so I can see what's happening, and then I'll play it. And what that's going to do is, I'll close my window here, minimize my syntax. You can see that the outcome of that procedure is to just reverse score the ZL4 variable. By default, this SPSS just makes that a nominal variable. I don't know why, but I'm going to change that to a scale. Okay, so that's one procedure. Transform, compute, and then you need to come up with a numeric expression that is going to give you the recode that you need. And as the textbook explains, depending on the original values in your scale, the numeric expression will depend. There are times when you can just take the number of values in your scale, like 1 through 7, and then just go one additional value. So 1 through 7, then just go one additional value up to 8, and then subtract each score, and that'll do it. But not always. So because this procedure, the numeric expression will depend on what the original values are, I actually think that there's a better way, and a way that will always work. So I want to show you that as well. So another way to do the recode is to go into transform, and you'll actually notice that there's these two options down here. Right? So it's the same menu, but rather than going to compute, we just go to recode into same and recode into different. Okay? What we want to do is select recode into different variables. I'm going to select that. As our input variable, we're going to go to, I'll show you this right here. We're going to go to our ZL4 variable and move that over. So I want to recode ZL4 to an output variable. So we just need to come up with a name. So similar to the compute command, we have to give our new variable a name. So I'm going to call this zeal4. Now, normally I would call this zeal_4r. We already have that variable. So SPSS is going to give us an error message if we try to do that. So just so it's different, I'm just going to stick another underscore at the end of it, and that'll have it be recognized as a new variable. And then you want to hit the change button. You can also include a label here as well, a descriptive label. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip that. All right, so we've got zeal4, which is going to be recoded into a new variable, which is zeal_4r, and then we just need to specify the old and new values. Okay, so here's our old value input and then our new value input. So what we want to do is let's start with 1 and say, all right, well, so for recoding this variable, we're going to start with 1, and I want to change my 1s into a 7. And then we add that. So old is 1, new is 7, so this is saying change 1 into 7. And then we just repeat that process with our the old values that we want to change into new. So as you can see, it's just a little bit time-consuming and cumbersome, but for me, it's a lot more intuitive than coming up with a numeric expression because, you know, you can just say, oops, what did I do wrong there? I think I tried to do a 2. So that's, I guess, a good thing about SPSS is it yelled at me for doing something incorrect. Okay, so that's the process. So that's our list. And this particular procedure of doing this recode dialog box actually gives us several different options. I go into detail in the other video about that. We're going to continue, and then I'm going to go to paste and paste that syntax. Pull up my window, and there we go. And so again, the nice thing about this is once you paste the syntax, you can just give it a look and say, is this going to do what I have in mind? Okay, so you can take a look and say, yes, I'm sure I want the 1 to go to a 7, and I want the 2 to go to a 6, I want the 3 to go to a 5, I want the 4 to go to a 4, which, by the way, you do need to include that. Otherwise, SPSS says, well, I don't know what you want to do with the 4s. So you need to say 4 needs to still be a 4, so a 4 should be recoded into a 4. So I'll highlight and play it. And then what you're going to see is you've got the identical variable. So it's just a different process for doing the exact same thing, but I wanted to show you that because it's ultimately more intuitive to me to use the recode into different variable command. So option 1 is to go transform compute and then create a numeric expression. You can do it that way. If it makes more sense, you can go to transform, recode into different variables, and then go through the process of specifying old values into new values. Okay, so 2 different steps. One thing that you'll notice is that you absolutely want to do recode into different variables, so you know that you've created a new variable, which is a recode of the original. Okay, let me just get that out of there. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create variables that combine scores into a single variable. And this is useful when we have a psychological inventory that has numerous items that are measuring the same thing. Ultimately, we want to get a single score for a single person. So what we want to do here, we recoded this for a reason. It's because we want to use this recoded score. So we're going to come up with both a sum score and then an average score that is the sum or the average of our 4-item inventory, using not the original variable, but the recoded variable. So the way that we're going to do that is first, let's get the sum score. We're going to go to transform, compute. The old stuff is still in there. So let me get rid of the old stuff. All right, I could have just reset that. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to get is, let's create a sum score. So we're going to call this zeal underscore tot for total score. I'm actually trying to remember what the exact variable name that the book used. I forget. It doesn't really matter. The thing is, you can call this whatever you want to call it. You could call this zeal sum if you wanted. So you just need to come up with a target variable that has a name that makes sense to you. In some ways, zeal_sum is more descriptive of what we're ultimately going to do because we're going to get a sum score. So you know what? Departs from the textbook just a little bit, but I'm going to leave it as zeal_sum just to highlight that you can call it whatever you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our statistical functions in this window here, click on statistical, and then that brings our list of functions. Okay, so we've got a max, mean, median, but we've got our sum. Okay, so click on sum, and I double clicked that, or you can just single click it and then move it up. The question marks are placeholders for our variable. So I'm going to delete that first question mark and then move over our first variable, which is zeal1. Delete the second question mark, move over the second variable, which is zeal2. Make sure to include a comma. Okay, your variables need to be separated by commas. Insert zeal3, comma, and then we need to make sure to get the reverse of zeal4. So there we go. So we've got the sum of zeal1, 2, 3 plus the reverse coded item, and I'm going to paste that. Open up the syntax, and then play it. Always gives an input and output window there. Okay, so what you can see is that created our sum variable, and hey, does that look like it's supposed to look? Let's just look at zeal 1, 2, and 3. So we've got 1, 3, 4, and then zeal4r is another 1, so that's 5. So it looks like that was created correctly. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an average zeal score. So we're going to go about creating that variable in much the same way. Go back up to transform, compute. Here for our target variable, instead of having a sum, we want, I think they called it mean in the textbook, so I'll stick with that. But you can call it mean if you wanted. You can call it average if you wanted. I just like to use a descriptive name for my target variable that is consistent with my other naming conventions, but is in some ways descriptive. So zeal average or zeal mean, they mean the same thing, don't they? All right, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of the numeric expression that I already have in here, which is in parentheses, I have all my variables of interest. But then instead of a sum, if I look down here in my function box, I'll see that mean is a function that is available to me. So if I type in mean, that will give me my statistical average of those 4 variables. So that's all we need to do is just change sum to mean and then paste. You'll notice when we open up the our syntax here, that the two expressions are very similar. And instead of taking a sum, we're just going to take a mean. But otherwise, you can see in the syntax where it's basically the same operation. Okay. Do I need to paste the syntax? No, I don't. But I want to have a record of my process. If I didn't paste the syntax and I just clicked OK at that previous dialog window, that would still generate the mean. So you don't have to do this. But for the assignments, I want to see a record of what you've been doing. So that's a way to get your record. Okay, and so this is an output. We don't need that output, do we? All right, I'm going to keep my syntax, so I'll minimize that. It's good to save as you go, by the way. All right, so let's take a look at that mean. And does that mean appear to be calculated as anticipated? Well, one real quick way to do this is to remember that by definition, the mean is just the sum of the scores divided by the number. So if our sum was 5, and there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5 divided by 4 is 1.25. The other thing that we can do is kind of just say, hey, does it make sense that the mean of 1, 2, 1, and 1 would be 1.25? Yeah, that looks right. I suppose if you were compulsive, you could get your calculator out and just calculate the numbers yourself, but that mean looks correct. Okay, and then the very last thing that we're going to do is calculate a z-score. In the previous video, I go into some pretty in-depth explanation of how SPSS calculates z-scores, how to interpret z-scores. For this video, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you how to produce z-scores. So I'll show you 2 ways. let's just say we want to get a z-score for this variable ZL1. We're going to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Descriptives. You'll see this option, Save Standardized Values as Variables. This is how we produce z-scores. So for our first variable, get the names in there. My default is to have labels, but it's actually nicer to look at the variable names. It's easier. Let's just do that for both ZL1, and then just to show you, because I think that the assignment is going to have you look at a z-score for a composite variable like a mean. So I'll do that one too, just to show you that it's possible to create multiple sets of z-scores for multiple variables. If you only have one variable in there, it's only going to create z-scores for that variable, but because we have two variables in there, it will create z-scores for both. Previously, in a different tutorial, it was all about getting descriptive statistics for our variables, so that's still there, and our output window will spit out these descriptives. But the new step here is to click on this button, Save Standardized Values as Variables. Okay, I'll paste that just to make sure that I'm continuing with my process of getting a record. Okay, and then I'm going to run that. And so there's our, I'll just point out that the output window came up. But then you can see what SPSS creates for us are our two sets of z-scores. So this says ZL_1, so this is a z-score for ZL1. So the raw data has been converted into z-scores, and then the same thing with ZL_mean, that just says that this is the z-score for ZL mean. So all of the raw scores have been converted to z-scores. Okay, so there's a little bit of an interpretation that goes along with it, but to get a little bit deeper into for the interpretation, I might steer you towards reading the chapter or going through the longer tutorial. But for those of you that are mostly just interested in being able to go through the SPSS commands to generate the procedures that you need, this tutorial essentially just accomplished that. So the lab assignment this week is not going to be working with this data. So there's a new set of data that I'm going to have you show me that you can kind of learn and understand and generalize these procedures. But I wanted to just give a very quick overview. So if you can follow these procedures and replicate these procedures and do it on a different data set, you should be in pretty good shape to do the assignment this week. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.